When your kindness looks like weakness. Stoicism and inner strength. Being kind is not always enough. And often, it's your kindness that makes people underestimate you. You try to be fair, to listen, to give, to understand. But instead of appreciation, you get neglect. Instead of respect, suspicion. Instead of gratitude, exploitation. It's a strange feeling. The more empathy you show, the more people feel entitled to ignore you, cross your boundaries, or place you last. And then, a painful question arises. Am I being foolish? Weak? Is being kind a mistake? That's when many people snap. They grow bitter. They change, not out of wisdom, but out of hurt. Others retreat. They repress their softness, hide their generosity, and bury their nobility in fear of being wounded again. But what if I told you that true strength and kindness lies in not needing validation? That Stoic philosophy saw virtue not as weakness, but as the only real power no one can take from you. Being kind is not the same as being naive. Being just does not mean being blind. But for others to see this, you must first free yourself from the need to be liked. You must learn to separate your righteous intention from other people's reactions. And more than that, you must develop the kind of firmness that doesn't shout, but stays. That doesn't attack, but inspires. That doesn't break and doesn't bend. In this video, we'll walk together through this delicate path between giving too much and abandoning yourself in the process. You'll understand why being good doesn't mean accepting everything. You'll discover how Stoicism can help you stay grounded without losing your essence. And most importantly, you'll begin to rebuild trust in your own virtue, even when no one else seems able to recognize it. Part 1. Kindness that comes from courage, not from need. There's a kind of kindness that comes from courage, and another that comes from need. The difference between them, though subtle, determines whether you'll be respected or used, admired, or merely tolerated. True kindness, the kind the Stoics would call virtue, doesn't beg for recognition, doesn't bend out of fear, and doesn't disappear when dismissed. It's firm because it's rooted in self-command. It's calm because it doesn't rely on reactions, and it's active because it chooses what's right, even when no one notices. But many people confuse the two. They mistake submission for compassion. They mistake silence for peace. They mistake tolerance for the absence of boundaries. That's when kindness turns into weakness. Not because kindness is weak, but because it's been contaminated by the need to be accepted. When you start doing good just to be liked, you start accepting crumbs. When you give in just to avoid upsetting others, you start betraying yourself. When you keep saying yes just to preserve connection, you start disappearing from your own life. Epictetus taught that the key to freedom is distinguishing what's within your control from what isn't. Gaining others' respect isn't in your control. Keeping your integrity is. That's why Stoicism challenges us to reverse the logic. Don't be good to be seen as good. Be good because it's who you've chosen to be. It's not about applause or approval. It's about living in alignment with what's right, even if it costs relationships, comfort, or status. Kindness isn't servitude. It's not self-erasure for the sake of harmony. Kindness is an invisible strength that knows when to stay quiet and when to speak up. That knows how to say yes with generosity and no with strength. You don't need to stop being kind, but you do need to stop letting others mistake your light for weakness. Your gentleness isn't weakness. Your empathy isn't weakness. Your care isn't weakness. What makes it fragile is the fear of losing people who never valued it in the first place. Part 2. The illusion of being nice, when you abandon yourself to be accepted. Have you ever noticed the difference between being a good person and being the nice one everyone steps on? That difference lies in your inner posture, in how you show up in the world, in what you silently tolerate, and in how often you shrink yourself just to keep fragile connections alive. The problem isn't in being kind. The problem is in what you allow, in the name of kindness. When you say yes while your heart is screaming no. When you stay quiet, even when something is clearly wrong. When you offer the best of yourself to people who only take and disappear, you're not being good. You're abandoning yourself. And there's nothing virtuous about that. It's self-abandonment disguised as altruism. It's fear of confrontation dressed up as empathy. It's a lack of self-worth wearing the mask of generosity. The Stoics were clear. Virtue without reason is disorder. If you act with compassion but destroy yourself in the process, that's not compassion. It's unnecessary sacrifice. If you stay silent about what's hurting you, that's not patience, that's omission. If you dim your light just to not disturb anyone, you're violating the most sacred principle of philosophy, living in accordance with your rational nature. And to live by reason doesn't mean to live without emotion. It means not being enslaved by any of them. Not by guilt, not by the fear of rejection, not by the belief that you're only valuable if you're useful or pleasing. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Think constantly about how many things you've overcome and how many more you are capable of enduring." That includes people, situations, and the moment you realize you no longer have to fit where you're not respected. You don't have to prove you're good. You just need to stop shrinking so others can feel bigger. Because in the end, those who treat your kindness as weakness still have no idea what true strength looks like. Part 3. When being firm is also an act of love. There is a kind of love that sets boundaries, that knows when to stop insisting, that understands allowing everything isn't kindness, it's neglect of yourself. Being firm is not being harsh, it's being clear. It's recognizing your worth and refusing to live in places where that worth is constantly ignored. Many people confuse firmness with coldness, but real firmness is a form of self-love that radiates maturity. It says, "I respect you, but I respect myself too." It says, "I'm here, but I won't stay where I'm being harmed." In Stoicism, we learn that virtue means living in harmony with reason, and reason, when aligned with love, knows when to walk away, knows when to preserve silence, knows when to say, "This crosses my line." You can love someone and still say no. You can remain kind and still end a harmful relationship. You can continue helping and still guard your own space. The idea that love must tolerate everything, endure everything, accept everything, is a distortion that fuels toxic and self-destructive relationships. To a Stoic, true connection must be free. Free from fear, free from guilt, free from emotional debt. The philosopher Heracles spoke of concentric circles of affection. We begin by caring for ourselves, then for family, then community, and so on, always expanding outward from the center. In other words, caring for others starts with caring for yourself. There is no virtue in hurting yourself to make someone else comfortable. Being firm is saying, "This is where I draw the line." It's not needing to yell to be heard, not needing to beg to be respected. It's understanding that true love doesn't demand your surrender, but your full presence. The quiet firmness of someone who knows who they are is more powerful than 1,000 speeches from someone who constantly erases themselves just to be accepted. And that strength is also kindness. Only now. It doesn't need to prove itself. Part 4. The distance between being respected and being tolerated. One of the hardest truths to face is this: realizing you're not admired, you're just tolerated, that your presence isn't appreciated, just convenient, that people don't stay because they value you, but because it's easy to keep someone who always says yes. And that hurts, because no one wants to feel like a burden. Deep down, we all want to be seen as essential, not replaceable, valuable, not optional. But here's the trap. The more you try to be useful in order to be accepted, the more you reinforce the belief that your worth depends on how much you give. And that creates a painful emotional chain. You give more and receive less. You tolerate more and get ignored more. You try harder and end up discarded faster. Stoicism teaches us that respect is born from coherence, from integrity, not from the need to constantly prove our worth through sacrifice. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Do what is right, let the rest go." This means your sense of justice, your kindness, your generosity must always walk alongside your freedom. And freedom includes the ability to walk away from places where you're not respected. You can love someone and still step back. You can forgive and still protect yourself. You can be generous and still hold firm boundaries. Because in the end, what you tolerate teaches others how to treat you. If you accept being ignored, that becomes the norm. If you accept being placed last, that becomes your role. If you try to be good enough all the time, you won't be seen as strong, only as available. Respect is not something you demand. It's something you build through presence, firmness, and the courage to leave when necessary. And once you begin to truly respect yourself, even if it hurts, even if it's lonely at first, the world starts to look at you differently. Because those who walk away from where they're not valued walk toward the kind of space where their true strength is finally recognized. Part 5. The silent cost of always being the strong one. Being the strong one has a silent cost. You become the one everyone turns to when things fall apart. But no one really asks how you're doing. You listen, support, help, but rarely are you the one receiving those things. And at first, you handle it, because it feels noble to be the solid one. But over time, that strength starts to feel like exhaustion, and what once felt like virtue begins to feel like a cage. The truth is, when you never show your wounds, people forget you can bleed. When you always solve things alone, they assume you never need support. When you never ask for anything, the world gets used to giving you nothing. Stoicism doesn't teach you to be numb. It teaches inner strength, yes, but a strength that honors your humanity. Seneca said that the wise person also feels pain, but faces it with courage. That means even the strongest get tired. What separates the wise from the emotionally enslaved is not the absence of pain, but the way they respond to it. Strength isn't about being untouchable. It's about knowing when to ask for help, without shame. It's about recognizing your vulnerability, without losing your dignity. It's about understanding that self-care is also your responsibility. You don't need to carry the world just to prove you're reliable. And you don't need to say yes to everything just to keep people around. Those who only stay when you're overextending yourself aren't really with you. They're with the version of you that benefits them. And when you finally start pulling back, guilt shows up. But that guilt isn't proof you're wrong. It's a symptom of your healing. It's your old pattern resisting the birth of a new boundary. You have the right to be strong without being overburdened. The right to be kind without being exploited. The right to be firm without becoming hard. And most of all, you have the duty to remember this. Your strength isn't measured by how much you silently endure, but by how wisely you choose where, when, and with whom to keep being that strength. Part 6. When you realize you're always explaining yourself, there's a kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from your body or your schedule. It comes from your soul, from constantly having to explain yourself, from justifying your kindness, your intentions, your heart. You help and have to explain that you expect nothing in return. You say no and must prove you're not being selfish. You set a boundary and feel the need to defend it so you won't seem ungrateful or cold. But the truth is this: when you feel like you're always explaining yourself, you're likely surrounded by people who don't want to understand you. They just want to control you. Then comes the inner conflict. Am I doing something wrong? Or am I simply living among people who can't handle my integrity? Stoicism teaches us to live with autarkeia, a state of inner self-sufficiency. It means acting from your principles, not from others' expectations. It means refusing to bend what's right just to avoid discomfort. And more than anything, it means no longer living as a defendant, constantly trying to prove you're good enough to stay in someone's life. You don't need to beg for understanding. You don't need to argue for your acceptance. You don't need to shrink to fit someone else's limited view of who you're allowed to be. Stoic firmness is quiet. It doesn't shout. It doesn't force. It doesn't justify. It simply lives according to what is right. And those who have eyes to see will see. The more you try to explain your essence to people who refuse to listen, the more distant you become from yourself. And the more you try to be understanding with those who have no interest in understanding you, the more disconnected you become from your truth. Stop explaining. Anyone who gets offended by your clarity, your boundaries, your refusal to tolerate disrespect, never deserved that space in your life. Marcus Aurelius said, "The best revenge is to be unlike the one who wronged you." So don't stop being kind. Just stop wasting that kindness where it's not seen. Direct it to those who recognize it, to those who value it, to those who don't need subtitles to know they're in the presence of someone rare. Part 7. When you realize being kind doesn't mean being always available. Kindness does not require you to be constantly available, but for a long time you believed that being a good person meant always being there, ready to listen, to help, to give, even when you were breaking inside. And that belief slowly turned into a pattern, an emotional habit, a role you perfected, the silent rescuer. But there came a moment when you looked around and realized that while you were healing everyone else, you were bleeding. While you were lifting others, you were crumbling. While you were saying yes to everyone, you were saying no to yourself. And that's where many people lose themselves, believing that in order to keep others' love, they must always be accessible. But the truth is, no one respects what's always available. People respect clarity. They respect boundaries. They respect someone who knows when enough is enough. Stoicism teaches us that everything has its measure, and wisdom lies precisely in recognizing the balance between presence and self-exhaustion. Seneca once said, "It's not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a lot of it." This applies to our emotional energy too. You weren't born to be everyone's emotional safety net, or the forever available listener, or the anchor for those unwilling to learn how to swim. You were born to live with purpose, to love with truth, to give without betraying yourself. And sometimes the greatest act of love you can offer yourself is absence. Absence from what drains you. Absence from relationships that only take. Absence from the cycle that demands you be everything for everyone, and nothing for yourself. Being kind doesn't mean always showing up. It means being whole where it matters. It means knowing when to step back. It means not begging for space where you should be celebrated. And those who don't understand this still confuse gentleness with obligation. They still believe you were made to serve, not to exist with dignity. But you know. And once you know, you can't unknow it. Because real kindness begins when you learn to include yourself in the kindness you give away. Part 8. The end of waiting. When you stop needing recognition. You've waited for recognition, for the words that never came, for the look of appreciation, for the validation that always seemed close, but never arrived. And on the outside, you stayed composed, telling yourself it was fine, that you expected nothing, that you gave out of love, ethics, or values. But inside, there was a quiet ache. The ache of not being seen, of not being valued, of always being there for others, and being forgotten when it was your turn to need someone. This kind of waiting wears you down, because it ties you to an illusion that if you keep being kind, one day people will finally notice. But Stoicism delivers a sharp, liberating truth. You must not do good in search of applause. You do it because that's who you are. Because that's what living with arete, moral excellence, means. Epictetus was clear. If you want to improve, be prepared to be laughed at and misunderstood. In other words, virtue doesn't require a spotlight. And if your kindness is chained to the desire for validation, it's not fully free. What truly frees you isn't being seen. It's no longer needing to be seen. It's doing what's right, even in the dark. It's staying aligned with your integrity, even in silence. You begin to find real peace when you stop trying to convince others of your heart. When you realize that staying true to your principles is worth more than any temporary praise. When you stop begging for attention and start directing your energy toward what builds, even if no one claps for it. That's not coldness. That's maturity. You don't have to become numb. You just have to stop begging for affection, respect, recognition. True respect begins not when you demand it, but when you embody it in how you treat yourself. Because in the end, the ones who truly see you never need proof, and the ones who don't were never worth the effort. Part 9. The courage to be misunderstood. At some point in your life, you'll face a difficult choice: keep shaping yourself to please others, or accept that you'll be misunderstood for being true to yourself. And yes, it hurts, because a just heart doesn't want to cause harm. A sensitive heart doesn't want to disappoint. But eventually, you realize you can't keep living in constant self-censorship just to remain acceptable to everyone. The truth is, when you start setting boundaries, when you stop staying silent about disrespect, when you begin to take your well-being seriously, not everyone will applaud. Some will say you've changed, others will call you selfish, and some will simply walk away because they can no longer manipulate you like before. That's where one of Stoicism's core virtues becomes essential: courage. The courage to be misunderstood and still remain whole. The courage to stop explaining yourself to people who twist everything. The courage to keep being kind, even when they mistake it for coldness. Seneca said, "The worst loneliness is not to be comfortable with yourself." And that's exactly what happens when you live trying to maintain the perfect image of being the nice one. You betray yourself. You abandon your truth. You become an actor in your own life, performing a role that no longer fits. You don't need everyone to understand you. You just need to be real with yourself. Being firm will sting at first. Rejection may feel sharp, but over time, you'll see that the freedom that follows is priceless. Because once you learn to withstand the discomfort of being misunderstood, you free yourself from the emotional prison of needing approval. And that's one of the most powerful inner victories a Stoic can achieve: to act with virtue even when the world sees the opposite. You don't have to harden. You don't need to become cold or indifferent, but you do have to accept that not everyone will understand your light. And that's okay, because your inner peace is worth more than anyone else's opinion. And those who truly belong by your side will recognize your truth without needing a single word. Part 10. The silent victory of those who don't give up on being good. In the end, what truly matters isn't how many people understood you. It's not who stayed or who walked away. It's not how many compliments you received, or how many times you were underestimated. What matters is that you didn't give up on being good, even when your kindness was mistaken for weakness, even when your empathy was interpreted as naivety, even when you were treated as if you were less, simply because you chose not to fight back. That's strength. And not just any strength, the kind of quiet strength that Stoicism cultivates, the kind that doesn't need an audience, the kind that does the right thing even when no one is watching, the kind that stays true to itself while the world screams for you to become someone else. Because being good in a world that rewards selfishness is revolutionary. Being fair in a world that normalizes indifference is an act of resistance. Being virtuous without needing to show off is wisdom. Marcus Aurelius once said, "The best life is one lived in harmony with your own nature. And if your nature is generous, empathetic, caring, honor it. But don't let anyone turn your light into a burden. Don't let your kindness become an excuse for mistreatment. Don't let your heart become a bridge for people who only want to cross and never look back. You don't have to become hard. You just need to become solid. To protect what's noble in you without begging others to see it. To choose where your energy goes. And to accept that sometimes the greatest sign of evolution is not becoming untouchable, but remaining kind. Only now with wisdom. Because there comes a moment when you understand. Those who can't value your presence never deserved your giving. And moving forward with serenity, with clarity, with grace, is the greatest victory of all for those who choose to live in virtue. If this video brought you clarity, strength, or peace, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Your act of kindness might be exactly what they need to awaken. And if you want to keep growing in clarity, emotional resilience, and inner mastery, stay with us for the next episode. Because what's coming next will shift the way you face the silent tests that life places in your path.